I'm Brian Carpenter, host of Fresh Air at 5, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Dr. Laura Lipton. Laura is an international consultant, writer, researcher, and the author of the book, Groups at Work, Strategies and Structures for Professional Learning. Awesome practical book. Will help you learn strategies that make your working together in groups productive and effective. So much to learn. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you took a minute to help out the podcast. How could you do that, you ask? I'm glad you asked that question. Well, here are 3 ways. 1, you could tell a friend and share links. 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, click on the link on my website homepage where it says, Buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 or more, to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Laura Lipton, EDD, has been a featured speaker at international, national, and state conferences since 1984. She shares her expertise with thousands of educators throughout North America, Central America, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. As an international consultant, her writing, research, and seminars focus on effective and innovative instructional practices and on building professional and organizational capacities for enhanced learning. Dr. Lipton engages with schools and school districts designing and conducting workshops on learning-focused instruction, literacy development, and strategies to support beginning teachers. She facilitates organizational adaptivity and learning through training and development in data-driven dialogue, group development, action research, and learning-focused collaborations. Her authored and co-authored publications relate to organizational and professional development, learning-focused schools, and literacy development. Laura's recent books include Groups at Work, More Than 100 Ways to Learning-Centered Literacy, Data-Driven Dialogue, Making Mentoring Work, Mentoring Matters, and Pathways to Understanding. Our focus today is Laura's book, written with Bruce Willman, Groups at Work, Strategies and Structures for Professional Learning. Laura, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I am delighted to be here, and thank you for having me, Steve.
Well, it's great to have you here, and our focus today is your book, Groups at Work, Strategies and Structures for Professional Learning. But before we go to your book, let's talk about you. I read this from your bio. Her writing, research, and seminars focus on effective and innovative instructional practices. So how'd you get interested in this aspect of education?
That's a good question. It's interesting because effective and innovative are not often related to each other. My beginnings actually were in special education. And I know that I thought about, well, why can't all education be special education? Meaning that we task analyze, we differentiate, we individualize, we scaffold for success. And so how do we make classrooms where teachers have the skills to do that for each kid, that they pace it appropriately, that the classroom is student-centered, rather than teacher-centered? So the interest is, how do you create a school and a classroom and a school where there's joy and there's success and there's positivity, rather than necessarily a rote drill and skill kind of a approach.
Oh, I love that. Awesome. All right. So our focus today is your book, Groups at Work, Strategies and Structures for Professional Learning. What was the inspiration for creating this book? There's got to be something that said, I need to write this one.
I need to write this book. Meetings, very few professionals that I knew actually said, oh, we have a staff meeting coming up, hooray. Meetings were oral memos, meetings were obligations. And so we really felt that, again, schools are places for learning, both for adults and for kids. So how do we create staff meetings and any other kind of team meetings, committee meetings, where people come together and they use their time purposefully? They use their time not just to dispense information, but to make use of information, to creatively problem solve, to be collaborative. And so that was the impetus, changing up the kind of ways that and the structures and process for adults coming together, professional adults coming together. And then we realized that that can't just be, yay, come together and do well and talk with each other. So there needed to be process, there needed to be structure, there needed to be a strategic approach to all of that. And thus, Groups at Work was born.
Gotcha. That's cool. And I like your reference there. Yes. Yay, we got a meeting.
Right. Yep. Can't wait.
Can't wait. Yes. In the opening of the book, you have a segment that's called About This Book. This is noted. This book is based on the belief that groups that employ a repertoire of strategy structures work more productively. Let's talk about this.
Okay. Well, first of all, again, with the theme that meetings should be functional, we're talking about creating meetings that are productive and satisfying and engaging, and that the meeting is also a forum for increasing the productivity and effectiveness of the group itself over time. And so having shared structures is time efficient. It clarifies expectations. It allows for a group to say, this is a hot topic. This is an emotionally fraught situation. This is a time crunch. Let's pull on one of the strategies we know that's going to create more productivity for us. So when they have shared strategies, the group then owns the process rather than somebody coming in and saying, here's what you're going to do.
I really love this book. I've been in education for a long time, and the number of meetings I've been involved with over time are considerable, yes. All right. And ones that I've been in charge of as well. And there's things that have happened over time that, lots of experience with meetings is that, a lot of times I begin by talking about whatever has got people unnerved or something and has nothing to do with
That's
what the
right.
topic is.
That's exactly right. I would also add, too, that one of the functions of shared process, a belief in process, and then having process tools or strategies, is there's a real difference between a group and that is really a collaborative, high-performing group and a bunch of people who happen to be scheduled in the same room at the same time. I mean, that is not a team.
No.
That's just here we are. So the notion that you want to build collaborative skills, you want to build collective efficacy, really, for that group, relies very much on structure and process.
That's awesome. I just think about how way back when it would have been nice. Over time, it's become something that you have somebody who might be learned in the aspect of how to run a meeting or how to get us started in the right direction. But
right.
Some of it's just like that herding cats thing.
Exactly. And people don't pay attention to that because they assume adults know how to behave. And adults do know how to behave, they just don't.
Correct. Yes, that is so right on the money, man. You should know better. Yes, but I'm an adult.
Right.
Therefore.
Yeah, but who cares? Right.
Right, exactly. I like that. Yeah, before we go any further, I have to point out that the book is full of strategies, somewhere around 75, I believe, and the reader gets access to these cool reproducibles to match and use with those strategies. Could you share a little about the reproducibles and the purpose for including them?
Sure. It goes back to what we've just been talking about, which is having shared repertoire, having shared strategies, having a process agenda as well as a content agenda that's purposeful. Again, meetings are often thought of as a stack of content topics without thought to what is the way that the group is going to interact with each other around these topics. So the strategies are about that. And the reproducibles and the resources are really about understanding that leaders of meetings, whether they happen to be the building leader or a team leader or a grade level department chair, that people are busy. And so if they're going to employ these strategies, the easier they are to access, the more preparation that's already done, the more likely it is that they're going to try it. And so we try to provide as much information, as much resource, as much ease of use to increase the facility and the likelihood of use.
And I really love that because it really takes away that aspect of, well, I don't know what I need to start, or I don't have this, or I don't have time to create that. And it's like, well, let's go online. Let's pull this down.
Right. And to add to that, I mean, one of the things you asked about the reproducibles, there are handouts that if the book describes exactly what the leader or the facilitator is going to need, and then some of the things that would be printable recording sheets, things like that, are already created. But they're flexible enough that they can be generic to any topic.
Love it. All right. Thanks. So it's cool. I spent a lot of time going through those reproducibles, and it's just, they're awesome tools. So good stuff to go with your book. Group dynamics can sometimes, if not often, derail a group. In the back of the book, page 91, so I'm going all the way to the back.
All right.
And there's a segment, and it's called Strategies for Forming Groups. And this is said there: creating purposefully structured task groups fosters relationships and widens perspectives. So talk about why this segment was included.
Sure. Yeah, we think it's critically important. First, it's important to think about a group not as a group of the whole. So if you've got 30 people at a meeting, think about 10 trios or, 6 groups of 5, or you do the math because I'm not good at that part. But essentially to think about smaller clusters, and then to think about mixing and matching them as well, because there's a saying that I like to play with. It's, if you always sit where you always sat, then you'll always see what you always saw. Nice. So, it's same old. I mean, there are meetings that I've been to and groups that I've worked with where you would swear that the furniture is carved to their anatomy. I mean, they have, that's my seat, and that's who I sit with. And so it gets a little old. So the idea of restructuring, not just for fun and games and fluff, but doing it in a way that is intended to have folks who maybe don't get a chance to work with each other or understand how the other thinks or get the benefit of a different perspective will have that opportunity. And it's also, if we're talking about a 45-minute meeting and we're talking about 15 or 20 minutes in a task group, it's not like you're, getting married. I mean, it's really, so work with this person, check it out, try something new, and then you can go back to your seat. So some of the notion here is not just the moving around, but the forming groups strategies also need a description of why. We talk about, and I'll add this a little bit, critically important for leaders to share what they're going to do, why they're going to do it, and then the directions. We often leave out the why because we assume people will know or they'll trust us. So it would sound something like, at today's meeting, you're going to be working in trios, one person from each of the grade levels in the middle school. That's the what. Because it's going to be important that we have vertical alignment, that we have subject agreement across departments, that we have the opportunity to talk with each other and understand what the grade before and the grade after is thinking and doing. And so, in order to get into trios, here's the how. So the idea of the what, you're going to work in trios, why, for these really critical reasons, and now here's how we're going to do it.
Love it. This is awesome because, it's funny is not the right word, but it's one of those things where helping adults have a meeting is important because otherwise it just gets derailed and all over the place. And I think it is just so important to help it get on track to do what they're there for and to understand what they're there for.
Absolutely. In fact, you used the word derailed earlier, and it's true. And you've been in groups where somebody says something and everybody turns to a section of the room because they know who's going to respond and they can predict what they're going to say. I mean, that is a group that we would call stuck. And part of the job of a facilitator or a group leader is to help them break patterns that are not functional. So it's pattern breaking, pattern making, and then re-pattern taking to a large degree. That groups feel comfortable. They know they don't balance their coffee and their snack or whatever. They know they're going to be moving at some point. So they're sort of even prepared for that. So those are very different ways of operating.
I like that. I like it. All right, so let's go back to the front of groups at work. And in the front, there's a chapter, a section called Strategies for Activating. And in there, this is noted. For group leaders, the opening minutes of a meeting or work session are critical for establishing credibility and earning psychological permission to lead that event. This is so important because this is where you talk about the importance of establishing norms of participation. Norms, man. Let's talk about that.
So the idea, before we even talk about norms of participation, I think the notion of the opening minutes is also critical in that's that quote. We think about group leaders as group developers, that a lot of the job of the leader is to create a group that's high performing, is to create a group that expects to tackle tough problems, that they're efficacious problem solvers, in fact, and that they're collaborative problem solvers, because the problem is going to keep on coming and there's no certainty, there's no easy answers. And so to do that, to keep people safe enough to know that they don't have to be right, that they can grapple with tough ideas and that they can disagree without making it personal, that requires structure, and it also requires establishing an expectation. So early on in any meeting, whether this is a group that's met, it's the first meeting or it's the 50th meeting, that early on in any meeting, the leader is establishing the expectation for that particular session. And they're also establishing their own credibility. Groups, people come in and you're leading a group and they're checking you out. They're saying, who's our leader today? Even if they know you, who is this person today, right now? Use the words establishing credibility and earning psychological safety. I would add to that also increasing receptivity, because you have people who come into a meeting and they're not really sure what's up, and they're not really ready to generally jump in, and they're checking you out. And so being clear, being transparent, being offering that what, why, how again. Here's what we're here for. Here's the reason that we're together. And now here's what we're going to do and what you can expect. It's fair to include them in your reasoning, in your purpose, and establishing expectations. And then critically, though, you need to be consistent with those expectations. So those first few minutes is really about opening the door to readiness, because you've got people who are going to sit there and their butts might be in the chair, but their brains are out the door. Or you're going to have people who are actually there as players. They're in the meeting. And even if they're not quite sure that they want to be in the meeting, you've turned the table so that they're at least saying, okay, let me check this out. That's a victory.
So right. That's, it's funny because, trying to get everyone together and focused. And, I've been someone who's just as guilty of this, where I'm as bad as that, if you've ever read the cartoon Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin goes off into fighting space aliens and things like this.
Right.
And I've been on that planet or out in space, not on planet.
Exactly. I love Calvin and Hobbes. I quote them all the time.
Nice. I love that too. Yeah. That's good stuff. All right. So let's look at another section here. We're going to, something that I love about your book is that it has these drawings and many examples, which is really cool, of what you are referring to. And for example, you have an activating strategy called finding common ground. And I really like this one. It includes a segment called Logistics, has instructions to the group leader and an explanation of the purpose and even tips. So let's talk about this in the section.
Again, I think most of the strategies, if not all, have those elements. So here's the logistics, here's how much time it's likely to take, here's some variations on this. We also add enough information for the leader to share the why. There's a why related to that. So probably I could turn to that page, but let me see if I can remember. The why for finding common ground is to get a sense of who's in the room with you, to get a sense of who you're working with, to find, to establish some initial relationships. And sometimes finding common ground has to do with a review or a reflection. So it could even be a question like, I've tried some new literacy strategies based on our last session. Who has, who hasn't. Not that it's good, bad, or punishment, but it's simply to say, oh, what's going on? Maybe I want to talk to this person later because they tried something I'm interested in. So it's finding out who's in the room. But the list that you just named about having the logistics, the instructions, the explanation of purpose, which is the why, and some tips for use. They were hard-earned. All of the strategies in this book and in all of our books have been field tested well before they were ever published. So we've used them with hundreds of groups. And so we can help a leader to be proactive in where things might fall apart or where they might get into a hole. And so those are some of the tips that we've included as well.
Love it. And there's just a nice grouping of activities to help that group leader to get people to work together, to kind of get an idea who they're in that meeting with and so forth. And it's just, I love all the information that helps you understand how to do, what to do, and, move forward. I love that.
There's also, in that particular strategy, and all of the strategies are pretty flexible. They're pretty generic. But one of the things about the title even is that it's a positive presupposition that there is common ground. Just simply naming it that and saying, let's look for that is a precursor to the kind of meetings you want to have where people are looking for common ground rather than differences.
Love it. Awesome. Yeah, all right. So let's shift to another section. The next main section is strategies for assessing, goal setting, and planning. In the opening of this section, this is stated: groups that are too busy to reflect and plan are too busy to learn and improve. All right. Talk about what types of strategies the reader will find here. This is cool.
Okay. Well, let me first talk, if I may, about the improvement notion. I mean, there is an assumption that the group is invested in itself. And that's part of what the leader is cultivating every time the group comes together, that this isn't just, it's not a one-off. The thing about meetings is that they should be cumulative in terms of the development of the skills of the group. And I think that's a key premise that I'm sorry we didn't even say earlier at the top of this podcast, because that really is a key premise of this work. Again, that groups should expect to invest in themselves and to continue to develop themselves so that they can do more complex, more challenging work more collaboratively. It doesn't mean the work is never easy. And so if you think about meetings as a contribution to group development, then we're talking about the group needing to assess, well, how am I doing? So it suggests that there's goals, not just goals for the task, but goals for the relational skills. So do we listen to each other? Do we interrupt each other? Do we, take up all the space, air hogs, we call them? Or do we consider who hasn't spoken yet and invite them to say something? So those kinds of things that high-performing groups do. High-performing groups use data. They put it at the center of the table, not just like, oh yeah, we know what the data says, but we know what we think, and it has nothing to do with those data. So setting goals for the group itself is a key piece of it, and then assessing those goals. So it's taking 5 minutes at the end of the session to say, how did we do? How did I feel about my listening? And did I feel listened to? Things like that. So the goals that a group would set, there's task goals always, because we're together to do work. There's also relational goals that need to be clear and purposeful And I would advocate chosen by the group, to work on. So that requires some kind of assessment, some kind of reflection. We can do cardiac assessment. In my heart, I know we did a good job, but we really want to have some kind of data that the group, even if it's anecdotal, that the group looks at and says, we are continuously improving, or we're falling down on this goal or this expectation. What do we need to do to ramp it up? So some of the strategies in that section have to do with task goals. Some of them have to do with group development goals as well.
I love it. It's something that for all the things that we've gone through training for in education, and before we even got in the classroom or into the roles that we play, one of the things that's been missing is teaching you how to be, effective or successful, or be able to meet together and work together to make those, whatever it is you're trying to come together to achieve. And because too often it's, you have to worry about to me, one of the things that you have to worry about is the ghost of, kind of like that thing with Christmas time, the ghost of Christmas present.
Right, meetings past.
Right.
The ghost of really bad meetings past.
Yes,
yep.
and they rear their heads.
Yeah,
exactly. They rear their heads, and and then you have the possibility that the future will be like the past or something like this. And,
exactly.
And it's just an interesting aspect of it, because that can really cause you to spend time on stuff that it's like, this is not why we're here. Whoever created that thought term of herding cats really creates a.
It's true.
It's
true. Focusing attention, which also brings us to the whole notion of those activating strategies. They are about, and the first 5 minutes, they're about focusing attention.
Love it. In this planning section, two of my favorites are right next to each other. One of them is called this: here's what, so what, now what? And the other one is if then. Let's talk about these.
Sure. A lot of the book and a lot of the work that Bruce and I focus on has to do with adult learning. So when you talk about group development, you're talking about the individual adults in the group, their willingness to learn, meaning their willingness to embrace change. Change is inevitable, growth is optional. So I have to say to myself, okay, I didn't do this as well, or I have the ghost of meeting past rearing its little head here, and I don't have to continue with that. I can change it up. I just need to feel safe doing that. So, so the idea of adult learning requires that we pay attention to who that adult is. We talk about, I think in this book, but certainly in some of our work, we talk about the idea of structure as a diamond pattern. So the top of the diamond is the individual adult, bringing whatever they're going to bring to the table. And then at some point, taking that and fanning out into those small groups, which we talked about earlier, why that matters. And then ultimately closing the diamond so that at the end of the meeting, we don't just disperse, but there's something that I take away that I say to myself or that I actually say out loud. There's a lot of ways to play with that. In the book, they're called the summarizing and organizing strategies, I think. There is a section for those, summarizing and synthesizing maybe. But the idea that you have that diamond, because if adults are the composite of their experience, and if you don't honor and bring that experience into the room, you've negated that person. You've lost them. So something like here's what, so what, now what? You knew I would get to this question. Something like here's what, so what, now what? Here's what is the top of the diamond. Here's what is, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I bring. Here's what I've noticed, whatever that here's what is. And I'll give you some examples. And then the so what is the part that the small clusters would be talking about in some way that's structured, ideally. And then the closing the diamond is the now what. So for example, let's say you're talking about issues with literacy at the middle school. And you have the middle school staff together, and the here's what, you have them fill out, everybody individually can come with something. I want to add this here, is that it's very efficient to get used to doing the top of the diamond piece or the activating piece outside of the meeting. So I actually come to the meeting with my here's what. Once I have shared strategies, and it's another reason why, to go back to your earlier question, shared strategies and repertoire matter. Because once I know, oh, we're going to do here's what, so what, now what, I know what that means. I can bring my here's what. I'm asked the day before to do it. But it's not such a huge thing that if I didn't do it, I can't sit the first 5 minutes of the meeting and get it done. It's not like you have to build a diorama or something. So the here's what is the top of the diamond. It can be done and brought to the meeting or done at the beginning of the meeting. So going back to the example of middle school literacy, the here's what might be an observation about or a pattern that the teacher's noticing about reading in the content area. Okay. I find that my kids don't have the vocabulary that they need, or I find that they don't have the writing skills that I expect, or whatever. Okay. So here's my observation. I break up into smaller groups. We talk about are other people finding that? We prioritize, let's say, and now we have an issue. That's our so what. So what do we want to do? And then we have a problem solving conversation, and maybe we agree on a couple of strategies to try with the kids. And then the now what is now for me individually, I go back and I write down, so here's my next step. So you've done a whole cycle of adult learning in terms of naming something, exploring and considering it, and then synthesizing it into an action in that one strategy.
So awesome. To me, it really lends itself to, I'm a former high school history teacher, and really kind of lends itself to the things that we do as we interact with other teachers. And you're talking about, professional interactions here. It's just, I think it lends itself to being able to come together and talk about or get the focus on what it is you're going to talk about that day. So,
yeah. And in addition, though, to add to that, it's easy, but not as effective to get groups together and say, we'll talk about this issue. But when you structured it so that everybody has a here's what, and they come to a small group, it means that I have something that I'm ready to say. It means that I've had a few minutes to think about it. It means that we need to leave space for everyone to offer their contribution because everyone has one. So the structure increases the likelihood that you'll have balance of participation.
So cool, because it really has that impact of, because so often you go into a meeting and you have some people who aren't going to participate.
Right.
They might look like they might want to, but they're not going to. They come in planning that, and then others who assume that the meeting is about them. So
that's right.
So they kind of dominate it. And then you have this group that's kind of in between that, just depends on if you hit the right nerve, and I don't mean that in a negative way, it was just whether they participate or not, by vocalizing, I mean. And
sure.
And I think it's, I just like this one, that it allows you as a person to participate, to get, to come with some ideas along these lines. I like that.
Yeah, and so part of what structure does is it suggests, so what we recommend always is to think, write, then group and share. So we call it think, write, pair, share, but it doesn't have to be a pair. It could be a trio. It could be whatever. So the thinking and the writing part, because we'll often say, it's very common to say think and then pair. But the writing part is respectful of different people's processing needs. So for me, I kind of need to have a minute, organize it, and jot it down. Somebody else, you can tap them on the shoulder, they're ready to talk. So it balances that. It provides for a good balance of different kinds of thinking styles and readiness styles.
Love it. It's awesome. In the opening of strategies for dialogue and discussion, this is shared. Strategies for engaging in dialogue or discussion are more effective when stacked with other functions. Could you share what stacked with other functions means?
Sure, that's a perfect question for right now, because go back to the diamond pattern. And so the dialogue and discussion would be in the outside of that diamond. It would be in the groupings, small groups that would be structured dialogue or structured discussion. And I'll say something about the distinction there in a moment. So it's stacked with an activating strategy. So, for example, you could have a think strategy or jot down strategy of some sort. So it's stacked with an activating strategy, then a strategy for engaging in structuring dialogue or small group work. And then it would be stacked with a summarizing strategy. So now after the dialogue and discussion, I jot down one thing I want to be mindful of, or one thing I'm aware of, or one thing I'm taking away, or whatever, something. So in that case, you would choose from an activating strategy, a dialogue discussion strategy, and a summarizing strategy to create your process agenda. And in fact, in the front of the book, there are some sample strategy stacks. Actually, I think we call them strategy stacks that give you a sample for a 45-minute meeting, for a half-day meeting, and for like a 2-day meeting. So it works in a variety of ways. But I wanted to say something about dialogue and discussion. So our definition, dialogue is open-ended and you're not looking for consensus. You're looking for diversity of ideas. Discussion is when you're ready to make a decision and you want to kind of explore the pros and cons, or whether options have met a particular criteria, because you're intending to lead to decision. So we always recommend some dialogue and then shifting that into discussion, both of which have different structures and different strategies for them, and then ultimately moving to decision.
That's awesome. It's just having the ability to use these concepts and ideas in your meetings just speaks to having a greater chance of being successful in getting others to participate and come up and share those ideas and thoughts. Because,
Yep.
One of the things that I've always experienced is the colleagues who, they really don't want somebody to ask a question.
That's right.
Because it shuts it down. And let's just listen to what we're going to be told, and then let's move on. So any questions? No. Yeah, exactly. You see the glares going to each other. You ask a question, and I'm going to hate you for the rest of your life.
That's right. That's right. Especially, the sun is setting and the last person asks a question. It's like, oh no,
Yes.
Now we have to stay and deal with this. No, absolutely. You're right. Yeah, you have people who stay quiet. They're vacant. They're not even really present. And so having these kinds of processes increase the likelihood of commitment after the meeting. If I've been involved, if I've been included, if I understand why somebody's thinking the way they are, or how the genesis of this decision, I'm more likely to commit to this decision. Even if I don't love it, at least I understand it. Because oftentimes you have people sitting there and nodding and smiling and, saying, yeah, I'm going to do this, sure. And it's just lip service. And lip service is the death of commitment. Absolutely. So genuine commitment comes out of participation, engagement, opportunity to disagree, and then rethink potentially and move forward.
So awesome. Your book's incredible. It brings ideas for being effective, bringing people together to have true discussions and ideas, share their ideas about what you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to just figuring out that if I just be quiet, you'll let me leave
right.
sooner.
That's right. This will soon be over.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Laura, as we're finishing up, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
They can go to our website, which is miravia.education. Education is written all the way out, not just edu. They can check with Solution Tree. All of our books are published through Solution Tree, as you know. And Solution Tree also offers lots of wonderful resources and additional books that we've published besides Groups at Work. And really, on the website is contact information. So if there's a desperate question or an interest in having a conversation, they're welcome to email me.
Awesome. And I'll have that information in the show notes, so it's so they can reach out to you and find your other books and so on, so forth and so on. So good stuff. This has been good. To finish up, I've got one last question that is something I like to ask my guests, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to approach this question in two different ways. In elementary school, my second grade teacher, Molly Friedman, made an enormous difference in my life in terms of just loving school, loving learning, really. Not so much school, but loving learning, loving reading. I was school phobic in first grade. It was terrible. And then I got Mrs. Friedman in second grade, and she turned things around. She made me feel like I could be successful and I was smart and I loved literature. So she just turned me on to that. And I never stopped, never turned around, never put a book down, was reading from then on. So certainly there. But also, though, in my adult life, I would say Art Costa and Bob Garmston, they're the creators of cognitive coaching, were such and are. Thank goodness they're both in their 90s and they're both still around. So I get to actually thank them frequently. Have really made an enormous difference in how I think about the world, personally and professionally. They gave me gifts that are too many to name.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it. Laura, thank you for talking with us about your book, Groups at Work, Strategies and Structures for Professional Learning. This book is awesome. It introduces the tools needed to help practitioners get the group working together, plan, and solve challenges. I love it. Thank you so much. Wishing the best in all you do.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.